Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Fred Birnbaum with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. We have some concerns with this bill. I think it attempts to do three things, and actually those are reasonable goals. If you consolidate, you can save money. The issue, though, with the fiscal note is right now, since we don't have a presidential primary, this would assume that we would have a separate one and would save money from that. But I think the bigger issue, and this is something that Senator Taves broached slightly, which is the impact. Idaho is not Iowa, and it would seem that just moving it to April would not be consequential as it relates to the presidential election. However, the trade-off is that every other election, which are consequential because every 2 years, obviously, the legislature's up and a lot of other officials, now that's moved to April. And particularly with respect to the legislature, that's awfully close to the end of the session. I just don't see the value in that. So I do, tip of the hat to Senator Guthrie for being forward thinking that if the presidential primary came back, it'd be a different day, there'd be extra money, and there could be some confusion. So I don't think the principle of consolidation is a bad one. It's sound. But I think the April date is the issue. I think if this was consolidated to May, it would be fine in the sense that we're not Iowa, and having it in April or May doesn't really matter for the presidential piece, but it matters for everything else. Therefore, as this bill is written, I would suggest that it be held in committee. Thank you, and I'll stand for any questions.
I do have one question, Mr. Birnbaum. Are you saying that you would support a presidential primary and a normal primary in May?
Great question, Mr. Chairman. I haven't given that a ton of thought, and I don't know if I really should weigh in on with bringing it back. But I mean, top of mind, I would certainly support that over the April. But in terms of having a caucus, as it's going to occur soon, versus the primary, I think my answer would be it'd be interesting to see how the caucus went before I think I would weigh in. And as brought up earlier, since the party has the right to have a caucus, I guess I'd like to see how that happened. But certainly, I would say unequivocally, it would make more sense if you are going to consolidate with the long-term view to save money and such, to do it in do it in May, not April, simply because I don't think Idaho will be decisive in the presidential primary, or more so in April versus May. And then you're giving up all the advantages of having it in May, the distance from the session and other things.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Birnbaum. Senator Winder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Birnbaum, thank you for that. That's one of my concerns too, is if we really don't have agreement with the party, are we giving up that May date, which again allows 6 weeks or so to go home and campaign? I think what was being proposed was a way to try and provide some type of a compromise and maybe get the party to come back. I think, there are lots of people out there that want to vote in a primary for a president, which will be disenfranchised by the caucus. Do you have any suggested solutions?
Mr. Birnbaum.
Mr. Chairman, Pro Tem Winder, I think my earlier answer is probably the best I could give. And I'm being totally honest here. I haven't really devoted a lot of energy, and organizationally we haven't, to the notion of the primary versus the caucus. I have a bias to saving money. I have a bias to consolidation. So I don't see that there would be a problem with having an election for the primary versus the caucus. Although the whole thing is somewhat strangely timed because we're going to have the caucus very soon, and perhaps we could reflect upon that. But I haven't really studied the history of the caucuses. The interesting thing about Iowa and New Hampshire, they've actually made that an industry. So if you talk about cost benefit, whatever it costs them to do, they bring in millions of dollars, and it's a business essentially, in the sense that it gets global And so I don't think we want to go in that direction, that we try to become Iowa or New Hampshire. I think we just want something reasonable, straightforward, and it's entirely possible that a May presidential primary consolidated with the others would be the best outcome. But having not seen the caucus, I don't think I'm fully qualified to answer your question.
Pro Tem Winder, follow up.
Follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Birnbaum, for that answer. One of the things we've talked about a little bit is that because the primaries, people think they're voting for the president in the primary, and in a way they are, but in reality, it's still up to the party to determine how they're going to nominate their candidate. So one of the things that we've talked about is, would it be beneficial to help with the turnout in whether it's April or May in those presidential election years to have some type of a educational process, a preferential voting so that people can at least express their opinion. They don't actually get to vote for a president until November, but a lot of people don't understand that.
Mr. Bummer, I didn't hear a question there, but you're more than willing to comment if you like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pro Tem Winder. I guess there's a lot to unpack there. Maybe the first time the change is made in some sort of education, but I think once it was established, there's so much coverage of the presidential primary to the extent it's on the same date as the other primaries, it might actually smother people's interest in the others to some extent, at least in a year like this year. But I really don't know if an education campaign would be needed. Honestly, I just don't have. Maybe it's a different type of crystal ball. It's certainly possible to have one when you make the first change. So if you're making it for the first time, that might not be unreasonable.
Follow up.
Pro Tem Winder, follow up.
Just to clarify, part of my question also was, what do you think, and would you support some type of a preferential vote in the primary election, whether it's April or May?
Mr. Birnbaum.
Mr. Chairman, Pro Tem Winder, I'd have to think about it. I don't have an opinion at this point.
Thank you, Pro Tem. Thank you, Mr. Birnbaum. No further questions.